good to see everyone, or not see you because I can't see you. I'm glad you're here. I at least hope somebody's out there. Anyway, I'm Chris Lemons. I'm an associate professor of special ed here at Stanford, and I look forward to the conversation today. I'm going to go through this just as a normal presentation. If you do have questions along the way, feel free to drop them in chat, and I think Amy and Eliza will notify me of that. But I'm also going to try to save some time at the end for questions. Okay, so basically, again, thank you very much for signing up to come to this webinar. I hope you're going to find it useful. My main goal today is to overview some work we've been doing improving literacy outcomes for students with intellectual disabilities, but also really to provide you with a bunch of resources that you can actually do some work with kids that you're working with. So as a reminder, I need to paste this into chat. 1 second. Okay, so you can take a picture of this QR code. I will also put it back at the end if you would like. Let me just put this in chat to everyone. There are a few articles in there that I'm going to reference that I think are really good resources for you. So basically, the purpose of today is to highlight the importance of literacy instruction for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, to provide an overview of some work my colleagues and I have done through an Office of Special Ed Programs Model Demo Center, and then really to provide you some resources to get started working with students with intellectual disability, improving their literacy outcomes. So a couple of definitions before we get started. So by intellectual disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD, which is how it will be presented on the remainder of the slides. What we're talking about are students who have a below average IQ, typically 2 standard deviations below the mean, and some deficits in adaptive behavior. Those are the characteristics to qualify under IDEA under this category. Previously, the term was mental retardation, and it does include students with Down syndrome, students who are on the spectrum, and other disabilities. When I'm talking about literacy, I'm talking about reading and writing skills in a pretty broad definition. I think you'll see as we talk about the model, or as I talk about the Model Demonstration Center, we've really had to think more broadly about what does exactly literacy mean for this population of students. And maybe that's something that will pop up in the Q&A at the end. So this is just a little reminder of a little introduction of who I am. So I am a person who was a special ed teacher before I became a faculty member. You can see some of these are some of my favorite people in the whole universe here. The picture on the left is my very first job that I ever had working with kids with disabilities in an after-school care program. I really had no idea what I wanted to do, but that job really changed my life, and it made me understand the importance of improving outcomes for this population of learners. And then I also taught in preschool, I taught elementary school, and then the picture on the far right is probably my favorite job, working in middle school, kids with intellectual disability, getting them ready for transition. So the reason I showed this is because I do try through all of my research to approach things very much through the lens of a classroom teacher, and to try to make things practical, actionable, and things that teachers can actually do. So hopefully you'll appreciate some of the resources as we go through here. And this is just a reminder of why in the world we're doing this presentation, and why I do this work, and why you do your work.
Do you like doing these?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just do them anyway then. Okay. Ready? Ready?
What are we waiting for?
Ready?
What are we waiting for?
Are you ready to do this?
Okay. Got this a.
Oh.
This is a girl. The girl is fat.
Wow. Nice work. That's a really good meow. It's kind of scary.
It's a really good meow. So this is just one of our friends in one of my studies that the reason I show his video is because he's an amazing kiddo that we were really able to get him to decode, at least on grade level. And he was a young kiddo with Down syndrome. And so I think he just kind of represents a lot of the potential that we have with this group. And I also love the meowing at the end because it's a great example of comprehension. He's understanding what he's reading. So a few other pointers as we get started. So some of the reasons we're doing this talk is that we know over the past 20 years, literacy instruction has really shifted from being pretty much functional sight word reading for kids with intellectual disability to being a more comprehensive approach to literacy. So including things like phonological awareness, phonics, and reading comprehension. So the way we teach kids with intellectual disability has changed dramatically over the past 20 years. We also know that many researchers have demonstrated that students with IDD can really benefit from systematic, explicit, direct literacy instruction. And so it's one of the reasons that colleagues like Jill Allure at SMU and others and I really try to push forward the agenda of improving literacy instruction, because we know that students can benefit from it greatly. My team's research and that of others has demonstrated that the sky really is the limit. I think one of the most exciting things is we don't know how far these students can go in terms of improving the literacy outcomes. But I guarantee you, every study I've ever run, there are always a handful of kids that exceed our expectations, blow us out of the water, leave us scrambling to figure out how we add more and more on top. But I think it's very exciting because we know that we can improve the literacy skills further than we may have ever expected before. And we also know this is critical work because improving literacy skills places students on a positive trajectory for post-secondary successes, including employment, independence, leisure, and happiness in life. So one of the most important things we can do for this population of learners is really rev up their reading instruction so that we leave them in the best position as they're exiting secondary school and moving into post-secondary. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about a model demonstration center that we have called the Design Thinking Approach to Enhance Educators' Use of DBI to Improve Literacy Skills. So this is a project, it was initially funded when I was at Vanderbilt, and then I moved to Stanford. And the model demonstration centers, if you're not familiar with them, they're really amazing mechanisms of funding, because what they do is they, every year they'll release an RFA, and they usually fund about 3 centers a year that are focused on the same topic. And what they want the team to do is to really help school practitioners incorporate evidence-based practices into their schools in ways that really work and fit. So it's a very flexible project, which I'll return to that in a minute of why I think that's so incredibly important. So this is my team. So Jody, Lakshmi, and Alexander are three of the people that have really been instrumental in this work. And so many of the ideas I'm about to share are their ideas, and I really thank them all for their time and dedication and just smart thinking. So this is kind of our logic model overall for the project itself. Let me just quickly look in chat. Okay, I think I'm doing good. Okay, so basically this is the logic model. So you'll see if you start over here on the left, whoops. If you start on the left, you'll see the rectangles in the middle. So this is the content that we're working. So maybe backing up a bit. We're working with general and special ed teachers of students with intellectual disabilities in grades K through 8. Our goal is to improve literacy instruction for the students with disability, also to improve the quality and quantity of inclusion time that those students spend in general education. So some of the things that we've done is we train the teachers on DBI. And if you're listening through this webinar, I'm hoping that you've heard of DBI, and I'll share some resources about that in a minute. We train them in evidence-based literacy practice. Diane Browder's model is the model we use, and I'll refer to that in just a second. And then we also provide them evidence-based coaching. So understanding how we can provide ongoing supportive iterative coaching to help meet their needs are 3 things that we work on. You can see we do this through a design thinking approach. And what that means is we iterate. So we're constantly giving teachers information and materials and asking them to take it, break it, make it their own, and make it fit into their classroom. This is probably my favorite part of this project, but it's not a rigid randomized control trial. It's much more of a problem-solving approach with the school districts, which I think actually has led to many of the successes that we saw over the last couple of years. We use an evidence-based coaching model where we're providing explicit feedback that's supportive and responsive to their needs. And then the teachers are engaged in a supported professional learning community where they're learning from and with each other. Some of the things that we're hoping to improve are teacher knowledge and skills, those enhanced outcomes of literacy for the students in the study. And we want the instruction to be aligned with grade level standards. We want to increase access to the gen ed curriculum. And then we've worked a lot in the last couple of years of making sure that the IEPs are aligned with the Andrew F. Supreme Court case to make sure that the IEP is rigorous, evidence-based, and that there is a system in place if students are not making progress, that there is a clear path of how that instruction would be revised. And this is really, I think, probably the best way that DBI fits into IEPs for kids with intellectual disabilities, is that the DBI process is perfectly aligned with Andrew to be a process to respond if students are not making the progress that you want. This is the typical DBI model that you've seen through NCII. If you aren't familiar with it, I encourage you to download the articles in the Dropbox or go to this link and learn more about it. But basically, it's an iterative process where we start with some version of a validated program. We select goals for the students. We determine how we're going to monitor progress. And if students are not being responsive, then we are reflective in our intervention and we evaluate and change what we're doing. And so that is DBI. And it's a really great process for special ed teachers to think through how they're improving instruction for kids. So this is the model of literacy that we follow from Diane Browder. And again, this article is in Dropbox. There's also a podcast linked here, and I'll link this podcast again in a minute if you would like us to hear me on a different podcast go even deeper into this instruction. What I hope that you notice about this figure is that if you look at the bottom of the figure, it has kind of the typical things we would expect. So things like phonics, comprehension, vocabulary, fluency, etc. These are kind of the typical ways we think of instruction of improving literacy skills for students. But what I really like about Diane's model is the top left-hand side as well, which is really focused on increased access to literature. So here the idea is that even when kids are not able to independently access text, we want to make sure that we're providing access to those texts that are opportunities to read grade level literature, to be involved in discussions that are high quality and deep comprehension. And I think this is probably part of my work that has been most impacted by Diane's model, is thinking not kind of holding back on how far we go with comprehension, vocabulary, background knowledge based on students' reading skills, that we kind of need to work on both of them at the same time, improving independence as a reader, but never forgetting that for many students, we can push further with comprehension and vocabulary beyond their current reading skills. So we also do use, just like in DBI on the NCII website, we have teachers use a CBM, or curriculum-based measurement, to monitor progress. We selected the measure called Cubed, that you can find more information on the link here. You can see the foundational literacy skills that are targeted in this measure. One of the reasons we really liked using this tool for our population was because of the narrative language measures, and that it does have some aspects of listening comprehension, which I think are really important for this group of students. So this is just going to be a quick example of kind of one student that we walked through. So you can see here that we, first of all, this is a student named Jasmine. You can see the progress monitoring measure of the cube that we provided on the right. And for this student, the teacher first conducted a CBM. And you can see that in terms of letter sounds, the student was able to read or provide 9 out of 62 sounds, 2 out of 54 sight words, 0 first sounds, and a listening retell score of 8. And so this was a good beginning part for us to determine these are important goals for the student to be working on. Very similar to the DBI process in the figure earlier, we then have teachers kind of identify instructional priorities and graph their baseline data. In this project, we determined over multiple years that one of the most efficient ways of helping teachers make decisions was to categorize our learners, and we came up with 4 different categories. We have pre-readers, novice readers, beginning readers, and intermediate readers. And in our project, we just found that this structure helped teachers determine which program they were going to work on or which program they were going to focus on. And so for Jasmine, in this case, she was identified as a novice reader. So she has some phonemic awareness skills, but she still doesn't know many letters, doesn't know a lot of sight words. And so these are goals that we're going to be working on. And so the teachers graph the baseline data, and you can see this is first sounds, which Jasmine really did not have the ability to provide first sounds. You can see those data points are all 0. But then we worked with the teacher to help them choose benchmarks and create objectives. So for this student, she had 3 goals. You can see those on the screen. So learning first sounds, developing additional letter sound fluency, and then providing stronger responses to listening retail. And so I think there was a question in the, as people were signing up about how DBI might map onto IEP goals. And so in this student's case, this was one way that the teachers incorporated DBI into the student's IEP goals. So then for each of the goals that we selected, the teacher graphed the benchmark so that she knew this is where we're hoping to get Jasmine by the end of the academic year. So this was targeting the end of the year in May. One thing you'll note, if you're really familiar with DBI and how it's used for a lot of students with learning disabilities, is that we often track progress much more frequently, maybe weekly. And one of the things in this project we kind of came to the agreement with a lot of teachers is that for a lot of students with intellectual disability, tracking these data weekly were not as responsive to quick changes we may have liked. And we found that for many of our students, tracking the data once a month seemed to be kind of the nice balance of tracking progress, letting teachers collect data and make adaptations, but not doing it kind of too frequently. And this is something I think we need to continue to do some empirical work and research on about really what is the ultimate or the optimal timeline. But for many of the teachers in this project, we found that once a month was good. So then the teachers select an intervention program. Here you can see for the novice reader, we used Early Reading Skills Builder, which again is Diane Browder's program. It's a really amazing program. And so that's what the student was placed into. This is the program itself. If you're not familiar with it, it is an explicit instruction, comprehensive reading intervention that focuses on phonological awareness and beginning decoding of reading of sight words and moving into connected text. And so this was a really good intervention fit for this target student. And the skills are taught sequentially using explicit instruction, and support is faded over time. And teachers are able to use a web-based version of the software. And we found this to be really helpful, especially during the COVID period. And then we continued with the app-based version during the time that we were working with a lot of our students. And this is just some example of the data. So you can hear this is first sounds correct. So you can see that Jasmine is making some really nice progress there, and she actually met her goal at the end of the year. These data are letter sounds. And so you can again see that she's making quite nice progress here. And so the student is being pretty responsive to the intervention. These data are irregular words, which you can see was much more difficult for the student. We don't have the changes to intervention graphed on this figure, but this would have been data then therefore that the teacher was determining, like, how do I kind of rev up how I'm teaching irregular words in my intervention. And you can see towards the end of the year, we were making a little more progress, but this one was a tricky one for Jasmine. And then these data are story questions, so being able to answer comprehension questions. And although not quite up to our goal, the student is still making good progress and really improving in her ability to answer questions. So one of the things that we also discovered on this project is that it was very challenging and I see that in chat, and I'll answer that one question, Amy. So one of the challenging things with the CBM data is, again, we didn't find it to be sensitive to really quick growth for this population of learners. And so a lot of what we did is supplement the CBM data with data that are more proximal to the intervention. So we really found this to be that these data are more sensitive to changes due to the intervention. They're more aligned with the intervention, and they often helped the teacher plan instruction better. So you can see on the right, this is the scope and sequence of Early Reading Skills Builder. And you can see that, you know, we're focusing on very specific things, like these are the 3-letter sounds we are working on today. Does the student know these 3-letter sounds today? These are the sight words we're working on. Do they know those specific sight words? And teachers found this data to be very beneficial because it helped them understand, do they move to the next lesson? Do they back up? Do they need to reteach something? And so I think this is critical. There was a question in the chat of, do we use growth rates? And for this population, we have not done that yet. I do think we used the CBM data and the supplemental data and just kind of informal data from the teachers kind of all combined to make adaptations, and used a lot of the teacher professional judgment. I think that we do need to do, again, more research on exactly the best way to capture growth for this population. But I'm also pretty happy with what we did, because we weren't pausing and waiting a long time to make adaptations. We were kind of doing it, combining a lot of information that we had available. And I think we could probably clean up the empirical side of that. It's a little bit messy. But I also think with this population of learners, if you work with them, you know that there's a lot of variability and splinter skills. And so it is kind of a complicated way to think about using data in a DBI framework. And then the early reading skills builder, I believe, does have placement tests to help you go through the program. And so we also use that data as well. So that was a question from Melissa. So some of the adaptations that we made over time were just giving students more time in intervention. So sometimes they just needed more minutes, sometimes more days in the week. We also increased focus on certain skills, so like sight words. We involved a lot of modifications to teaching procedures or reinforcement schedules. Behavior management and individualizing behavior management, interest, motivation, engagement are absolutely critical for this group of learners. And it's something that we built in from the very beginning. And that was often really the most frequent adaptation or change we made was related to behavior or engagement. And then as students kind of, if you remember the grid in the beginning where they went from pre-reader to novice and up, we did find that students who were kind of at that upper limit, that we really didn't identify a single reading program that really addressed all of the comprehension skills that we wanted. So there we definitely had to do a lot more creating of lessons and individualizing and kind of creating instruction that matched the students' interests that was outside of a broader program. So a few things that I think we've learned on the Model Demonstration Center is one, that science of reading is a good starting point for interventions with ID. I think this is a question I frequently get, you know, well, I've learned about the science of reading. Does it work for students with ID? And the answer is absolutely. Many of the skills work exactly the same way. I think some of the things we might have to do is consider pacing, make sure we're supporting working memory, and then thinking about how we're collecting data to monitor response to instruction. But in general, the skills are really critical to this group. And I would probably say in addition to that, we just also need to really focus a lot on generalization. So moving kids from being able to do the skills in a specific program to generalizing beyond that. And I think that's something somewhat unique to students with intellectual disabilities. We know that the DBI process is an excellent way to improve literacy instruction and outcomes. The model itself of kind of constantly collecting data and reevaluating what you're doing and changing is essential to making sure that these students improve their literacy skills. And so the model is an excellent way to do this. Again, you might need to make some tweaks along the way, and I think that's okay. And in the Dropbox folder, there is a chapter that walks through what it looks like for a teacher to do the DBI process. And so if you're interested, I would encourage you to check that out. We also saw that we know that educators need a depth and breadth of knowledge to be able to individualize and intensify instruction. And so I think this is one of the things that is challenging, as a lot of students or a lot of teachers who go through teacher prep programs, in many states, if they are getting certified to teach students with intellectual disability, they may not have had as many classes on literacy development. And so if that is something that you relate to, I'll provide you some resources there later, because we really also found that it's very challenging to individualize and intensify instruction if you don't have a deep understanding of how kids learn to read. And then this is from a colleague, Candace Till, who's here at Stanford, and we were having a conversation. Her little quote just struck me that I was talking about how much I'm really appreciating this Model Demonstration Center because we get to be flexible. And she says, you know, in randomized control trials, we control all the aspects that teachers can't, and then we're surprised when interventions don't translate. And I think that is just kind of a good learning point for interventionists out there and researchers that, you know, the real world is messy, and giving teachers the ability to adapt and individualize and make things match to their situation, I think is what made a lot of this intervention so successful. And so now I'm going to turn to another article that we wrote that just has some tips in it, and then I'm going to get to a Q&A. But just as a kind of preview of where we're going with the Model Demonstration Center, that project is just now wrapping up now. We just posted, well, I guess it's August now. It wrapped up the end of this last academic school year. And so now my team and I were working on a book that will be kind of an implementation guide for how to do all the things that I just covered. And so that will, I'm sure it will take at least a year to get that thing written, but that is kind of to be released soon. Okay. So now I'm going to turn to this article that my colleagues Jill Allure and Stephanie Alateva and Lauren Lejeune that we wrote a little while ago, but I think it's a good resource for you if you're really trying to think about how to integrate DBI into this instruction. And so I'm going to go through a couple of those tips here. And again, this article is in Dropbox. Okay, so basically in the article, we have 10 tips, and those are listed here, and they're outlined each in the article. I'm sorry, my dog wants to go out the door. One second. Okay, so there are 10 goals in mind, or 10 goals here in the paper, and I'm going to just briefly talk about a handful of them, but again, the rest are in the paper. So one of the things that we think is critically important is keeping big picture goals in mind. And for here, I think it's really helpful whenever we're having conversations about improving literacy instruction, and when the team is meeting, the IEP team, the teachers, the family, and the young adult themselves, that we really start kind of continue to remind ourselves to ask, where are we going in the long term? Where are we shooting for after secondary school? Are we going to post-secondary employment, post-secondary college experiences? And having those kind of key anchor points to focus on as we're planning, I think can be really helpful. I think it's really helpful to return to Diane's model to think about, to make sure that we're increasing both independence as a reader, but also access to literature. So making sure that we're not limiting exposure to grade level content just because the students' reading skills are not at grade level, but we're doing both of those at the same time. And then I think we also need to think a lot about how instruction changes from elementary to secondary school, and that is addressed a lot in the paper. But thinking, you only have so many minutes in a day, so how much time do we spend on discrete skills like phonological awareness and phonics as kids are moving into high school, and we might need to reshuffle some of that time to focus on transition skills, and that's kind of described a bit in the paper. I think it's also really critical that we understand where the students are currently and that we have measurable goals. And so SMART IEP goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, timely. I think we need to really make sure that our IEP goals are developed with a clear understanding of where the student currently is, what are the kids' current strengths, and then what are the next things that we need to learn to meet our goals. And then to also just be thinking a lot about what data sources are going to be used to evaluate strengths, areas of need, and progress. And so this is also kind of highlighted a bit in this paper, and I'll show you a tool that we have kind of at the end of this. These are great resources. Oftentimes I'll get asked the question of, like, well, if I'm developing reading goals for a student, where should I start? And I really do think both of these resources are useful. I know Common Core sometimes doesn't get the best rap, but the reading foundational skills really do provide an excellent model of the skills that students go through to become independent readers. And so I think they are great places to look to develop IEP goals and intervention targets. We also know that explicit systematic instruction is critical in all of our projects, including the one I just talked with you about. We use that I do, we do, you do approach. The reason we do that is because it's the most efficient, effective, research-based approach to instruction, and we know that it works with this population of learners. It's the best way you can use your time if you're a classroom teacher. We know that successful teachers model, provide guided feedback, and slowly release responsibility to students, and that doing that is the best way to improve their skills. And so if you are not familiar with explicit instruction, I highly encourage you to get the Arthur and Hughes book. It is amazing and very well written, very easy to read. But also NCII does have this course on features of explicit instruction that, again, it's free, it's available. If you were looking to do a professional learning community or something like that, this would be a really great place for you to start. And actually, I just did a training with a handful of teachers, and they actually determined their #1 goal this year was to target explicit instruction because it's not something they think they have been doing as well as they could have in the past. And we know that targeting this is going to really improve outcomes for your students. This is another article that's in the box that I actually really appreciate. This article by Rosenshine called Principles of Instruction, Research-Based Strategies That All Teachers Should Know. this is one of those that if it's been a little bit since you were in your teacher prep program, I encourage you just to print it out and read it, because there are many things in this article that you're going to remember and you're knowing like, oh, I learned that. But it's really just nice that it puts it all in one pretty easy, short document that are just reminders of like, oh yeah, that's why we need to do this type of instruction to make sure our kids are learning. And so again, it's a great resource. Next is professional development. And for professional development, here we know that we need to individualize and intensify the professional development, or I'm sorry, to be able to individualize and intensify, you have to have a deep understanding of reading development. And so if you are a school team member and you feel like, it's really challenging for me to think about individualizing or intensifying because I don't really have a deep understanding of reading, then that is something that you should target as a professional development opportunity. And you can explore opportunities to engage in research, especially if you're connected through AIR. You can email folks there, and they often know, different faculty member like me who are doing different research projects here and there, that might be a chance for you to engage. But also you can just form a professional learning community in your school or district. I'm going to show you a couple of resources. This is another resource through the Intensive Intervention Center that I think is just top-notch and really amazing. It's a whole course on intensive interventions and reading. And again, if this is something that you and your team run to really focus on this year, this would be a great place to dive in. You're going to get the most evidence-based research information, the most recent evidence-based research on improving literacy for students. And again, although this content isn't specific for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because it's the science of reading, all of the information here does apply for this group of learners as well. And then here is another resource that these are provided from the Institute of Ed Sciences. Both of these practice guides, and there's a practice guide on the left that again kind of walks you through what are the foundational skills to support reading, and then the PLC guide on the right. If you want to run a PLC with some people in your school, this would be a great resource because there's some videos there, and it kind of structures through how you might set this up in a PLC format. And then last, we want to make sure that we're involving service providers and family members. And so we know that reading doesn't just occur in kind of this little vacuum when kids are at school, that reading is a way of experiencing life. And we do it with our families, our friends, in communities. And so I think making sure that families are critical to our instruction is going to be really helpful. I think at the school staff, one of the things that I feel like we've learned a lot over the last several years of projects is that in integrating the SLP into literacy planning is critical. They are amazing literacy supports. And when you're working on both language and speech skills with reading all at the same time, you're kind of just doubling down on what's being focused on. It can make both of you more effective. Other service providers can also be really helpful. I think it's important to remember with family members that the literacy instruction that involves families should be fun, often more practice, maybe focusing on some generalization, but not necessarily direct instruction, and definitely not the first time that students should be introduced to some literacy skills should be through their family, because we want that to be engaging practice time. And I think, I've seen several times in some of my studies where a parent will mean very, very well and want to, do a lot more reading practice at home. And then we'll have the student that no longer wants to look at the reading worksheets whenever they come to class. So they don't want to read the book that we're reading. And so this has happened a couple of times. We'll kind of go back to the families and be like, what's going on? She doesn't like to read the books anymore. And they're like, oh, I've been reading them 4 times a night because I want her to practice really hard. And so we just want to make sure that we're keeping reading instruction at home fun. And then we also do want to make sure that the family members are involved in co-planning, establishing those goals, that they understand what the goals mean, and that there's a communication schedule going back and forth between the school and the family members so that they know what progress is occurring. In the top 10 article that I've shared, this is a set of tips for parents. And if you're working with parents or you are a parent, I encourage you to review this because I think it can be really helpful. Some specific things, that bottom, request guidance from your teachers on what to do and don't overdo it. Keep reading really fun. I think it's also important that we make sure that parents really do understand the data we're collecting and why those skills are important. And so I think this is a nice little tip sheet if you're going to meet with some parents to just get you on the same page about your conversation. In that document, also, we have this literacy planning tool that we wrote basically as kind of a tip sheet as you're getting ready for an IEP meeting. And so you can see here, this page matches directly onto the 10 tips that I've been sharing. So one, keep big picture goals in mind. And then you can see there are some points for discussion. So consider broad goals for the student over the next year, discuss post-secondary goals. And so it's a way that you can just structure a conversation with families to make sure that you're all on the same page and that you're planning literacy instruction for these students following the tips in that paper. On the next page of the document, you'll see that we have some places for you to write down, what is the goal right now in terms of instructional emphasis? How much are we focusing on basic literacy skills, moving up to more functional? Where are we in that kind of spectrum? And then making sure in Diane's model, she's very clear of making sure that regardless of where the student is in terms of working on basic skills to more functional skills, that we're making sure we have access to age-appropriate literature at all times. You can see the section D over here. We have a section for student interest because we know that targeting student interest is critical for engagement. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking about what the student wants to read, what they want to learn about. And then at the bottom of the page, you'll see that we have kind of taken Diane's model and moved it into this kind of Likert rating scale, where this is where the team would be focusing on saying, okay, are we currently working on increasing independence as a reader? Okay, are we working on phonemic awareness? What priority level is this? Is it low or high? And this can then help the team decide where should we really be focusing on thinking of each of those critical literacy skills. Okay, one more video.
I love it. Okay, you are done.
How come I'm being so good now?
Because we've been doing this for a really long time.
My goodness.
My goodness. That's what this has been doing. It's been helping you read. I'm so excited.
And so hopefully what you saw in that video is that as a student who's in one of our projects, she had some fairly limited verbal skills when she first started, and her paraeducator had been working very hard on reading instruction. And you can see that the student asked her para kind of at the end, like, hey, how can I read so well right now? What's going on? And it's because she's been working on it. It's also because that paraeducator was absolutely amazing. And so that went a little faster than I thought, but that's okay. We have some time for Q&A. But I just want to say, what I think is really the most important to remember about this group is that there are no boundaries, only possibilities. And so I think it's frightening and exciting to understand that we don't know exactly how far we can go with this group, but it's really amazing that whenever we provide high quality instruction, we can really change the trajectory of this group of students. We can change the trajectory of their life and really continue to enhance what we expect after secondary school in terms of employment and independence. And so that's why I think this is so critically important. And this is the Dropbox code again. And I think I'm just going to turn it over to Q&A. So Eliza, do you want to say a few things about the rest of the slides and then I can just do Q&A?
Yeah, definitely. So we've gotten a few questions already in the chat, and just a reminder to keep adding those in if any come up. But our first question here is, with the focus on generalization and attention to transfer, how have you involved the general education teacher in the model demonstration, or do you have any tips on involving the general education teacher in prompting the use of reading skills outside of the special education setting? And I know you spoke about involving SLPs and service providers, but anything specifically on general education teachers?
Yeah, so I think Okay, so we know that the general ed teacher is critically important. I think in the Model Demonstration Center, when we first designed it, we had kind of 2 tracks of modules that educators would engage with. The special ed teachers engaged in modules that were primarily focused on, developing those IP or the reading goals, selecting an intervention, and delivering that. We initially focused a lot for the gen ed teachers also on improving the way they support literacy in the classroom. And disappointingly, I guess, maybe, I don't know, I was a little surprised, it being in the, 2020, 2021, how much we needed to back up and actually convince gen ed teachers that students with intellectual disability did belong in their classrooms and that they were part of their community. And I think this probably hit the hardest in middle school, that there was a lot of pushback for including students in gen ed classes. And so we had to back up a little and think more about, like, how can we convince the gen ed teachers that this is a good setting for them? I think one of the most positive things that we were able to do in that space was share with them the progress the students were making in response to the reading instruction they were receiving. And when they were able to see the data that supported that this kid is a reader, this kid is getting stronger in her reading skills, then they were much more likely to be open to the idea of including students in their classroom. I think the main training that we did that really probably helped the gen ed teachers support students in their classes, helping them understand instructional level text and what a student can actually read versus not read, and why 8th grade textbook for many of our students is not, if they're an 8th grade student, that's often not a book that they can read. And just giving teachers the tools to understand how to evaluate reading levels, and then doing a lot teaching on background knowledge and vocabulary, doing that type of instruction, and then just thinking about helping gen ed teachers. Oh, someone wants me to stop share. Okay, so then, thinking about how we help those teachers adapt instruction. So how do we think about students being able to respond in different ways? And I think this really gets back to Diane's model, because it's about the notion that we can get a lot of content in, even if a kid isn't able to read that text independently. So having teachers understand that you don't always have to have the kid read the text to be integrated fully into the class. So I think those are some of the things that we've done. That was kind of a long answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And then our next question, we actually got a few different questions related to working with students who are nonverbal. I'm not sure if this came up for you at all, and if you have any specific resources or tips about, assessing or doing progress monitoring for students who are nonverbal.
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's one of the questions that actually the program officer at OSEP continually pushes me on, is that, it really is hard to measure progress on students who don't use spoken speech as their primary form of communication. So we have been exploring a lot, and I think we need some people to do a lot more research in this space as well. But we actually just probably the most successful thing we did is really zoom back into the scope and sequence of our programs and develop choice boards where there would be 3 icons, 4 icons, and having student touch the response in relation to that was one way that we could kind of keep track of whether they were understanding and that they were able to respond correctly to prompts. So that's one way we did it. I think that there probably are some better ways. I do think Diane's programs, the Early Literacy Skill Builder and Early Reading Skill Builder, do have strategies in there for students who don't use spoken speech. But again, I think it's something right now we're really kind of in the putting it together on the fly stage. So I think the person asking this question, I'm sure you're trying all kinds of things as well. And I think we're kind of still exploring that. But I do think maybe a positive note in response to that question is we have also seen that even our kids who don't use speech as their primary form of communication, they are able to still really engage in the instruction and learn important reading skills. So I think it's just, definitely don't not teach reading because the student's nonverbal, but measuring that progress is going to be a lot harder.
Yeah, definitely. And one participant did mention using accessible literacy learning, or ALL, with students who are nonverbal. I'm not sure if you had heard of that before, but
I have
seems like it could be a place to start for folks who are looking. And then another question that came up, was just clarifying on age-appropriate literature. So when you use that phrase, do you mean for the child's developmental level, or their grade level, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, this is a hard question too. This is something I think I feel like we struggle a lot on this one because, okay, so where do I want to answer? How do I want to? So I think in terms of content that kids are learning at school, we want them to be engaged with grade level work to the maximum extent possible. So some of the time when I say that phrase, I'm thinking, they need to be studying the same thing in science and social studies as everyone else. And so that's one way that I mean grade level appropriate. Another way, though, is thinking about what is the fiction text that kids are reading that they can have good conversations about. So we have this amazing teacher in San Francisco that he developed this unit focused on Star Wars, and they used graphic novels because that made it more accessible for all of the students. And this teacher really did the most amazing thing. He did the full original trilogy in graphic novels, and his kids were fully engaged. And what was so exciting about it is the principal of that school just was amazed with the depth of comprehension that was occurring in the classroom related to Star Wars. And they had the students, in the showcase beside the office where you can put all of your art and things like that. This class got one of the showcases for all of their Star Wars work. And then what was happening is a lot of the gen ed students were popping by the class saying, hey, are y'all the class doing Star Wars? And so I think that is one thing that I mean with grade level appropriate is these are texts that typically developing kids in the school, they're having conversations around Star Wars, and they've seen it and they know. And so they're able to have those conversations around things. And, like my favorite part of this story of watching these kids is there was one student who was fairly minimally verbal, and they were on the last day of the last episode of the trilogy, and hope to not spoil anything here, but Darth Vader doesn't make it. And so there's this part, talking about like when he saves Luke, what does that mean? And one of the students in the class said it was redemption. And it just blew me out of the water that is a very deep understanding of Star Wars and what it means for Darth Vader to have saved his son. And I think that's why grade level content is so important, because they didn't necessarily need to read the book. They were using a graphic novel, but they were able to understand kind of the human connection that's occurring in that story. And that's what I think we're talking about with grade level standards. The one other thing I will say, this is where the IEP team really needs to have some conversations around age appropriate, because one of the things that I think is challenging is we just hosted a post-secondary program here at Stanford for some young adults with intellectual disability. And one of the mothers was saying, her daughter, who's now 22, she really loves to read like little Hello Kitty books and very, young books. And so we had a conversation about, that is what the student wants. So we should honor that choice. But at the same time, it is, they're definitely childish looking books. So how can we maybe encourage her to read some additional things that are grade appropriate or age appropriate? And I think that's probably a decision that really needs to be made kind of on the individual kid basis with the family, the young adult themselves. And, I think that is, we want to have the students engage with grade level appropriate stuff as much as we can, but at the same time, if the kid really loves one, specific thing like Hello Kitty, I don't think that's the end of the world if they, have a preferred item. I think, some of us on this call might read young adult novels or something, that might not be age appropriate, but I do think having that conversation is very important.
Yeah, I love that nuanced answer. And the next question is on, folks looking for some more resources or general tips on how to intensify or modify interventions for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities who might be struggling. Just that intensification aspect, I think.
Yeah, so I think articles that are in the Dropbox are a very good starting point. That top 10 tips has a lot of stuff in it. There's also a chapter where we walk through a case study of a teacher using DBI for a student with intellectual disability. I think those can be great places. I think one other thing there on the intensive intervention website, there is I think there's a document, there's at least a module on the taxonomy of intervention intensity. Maybe Amy or someone can put that one in chat, but that kind of gives you a framework of what are some topics, or not topics, what are some aspects to think of when we're individualizing, because it's not just about increasing the minutes or increasing the time. Often it's about solving behavioral challenges, engagement, interests, and the taxonomy has some of that information in it. So I think that that is really helpful. I think the other links in the website of just understanding reading more deeply. Yeah, I think that's probably where I would start.
Great. And then I think we have time for one final question, and this one is kind of a broad question. So feel free to go as specific or deep as you want, but someone's curious how we can help include students with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the larger literacy conversations happening.
Ooh, I love this question. So I think, okay, so I think the first thing is to make sure that we're having really rigorous IEP goals around literacy for this population. So I think that's one, is just making sure that it is a clear expectation. I think, I feel like the students that I think have been the most successful in terms of being included, someone had done some pretty hardcore literacy intervention with them before they really tried to push inclusion. And so often, we actually did the study once where we were looking at taking little 4-year-olds and giving them a literacy intervention before they transitioned to kindergarten to see if there was a chance that they would be, that it was more likely their teachers would include them in reading instruction. And that study was a little bit of a mess and a little bit small, so nothing conclusive that we can kind of pull out of it. But I do think we have a lot of evidence, both on my projects and others, that whenever you take a little kindergartner or first grader into a gen ed classroom and they can read their name, they know some letter sounds, they know how to hold a book, it's much more likely that that kindergarten teacher or first grade teacher says, oh, I could see them fitting in my reading group, they should probably come. Whereas if the students have zero skills and also lack some of just the instructional engagement strategies to sit in a chair and that type of stuff, then it's more likely then in those rooms, I hear the conversation like, oh, she's not quite ready for reading. She's not quite ready. And that is probably one of the things that just fries my brain more than anything, is like, they are ready, they're ready to go. But I think one of the things you can do is give them some of those precursor skills that'll make inclusion go a little better. I think the other thing, and this is something I work on at several of the schools that I have projects in, is trying to figure out how does this group of students fit into the RTI MTSS system. And I think, sometimes you would see that a student with an intellectual disability, like they would never go to a tier 2 reading group. Like they're already in special ed, they have an intellectual disability, they're not part of RTI. But in several of our schools, we found that like tier 2 is the best instruction for this group of learners. And so I would just encourage teachers also to consider, whether we can integrate this group of learners into those other interventions that are occurring at schools. I think that matters a lot. And then I just think in general, the more we can do to show that this group of learners, they can become really great readers, and they also, even if their reading skills are not, coming up to grade level, their comprehension and access to, other topics is still growing rapidly. And we just need to make sure we're focusing on both of those things. And then I think Claudia here says something, ensuring they're not taking out of tier 1. And I also think that's very true, that we've really focused a lot on trying to make sure that our students are included in the gen ed as much as possible, because that's really going to help with the generalization, especially in early middle or early elementary, when we're pulling kids out. If they have to then go back after a period of time and try to figure out how in the world what we taught them relates to tier 1, that's very hard. Whereas if they're in tier 1 the whole time, then it's more likely that they're going to remember that. And maybe someone asks something like, where can their goals be met? Special ed is a place, not a service. And I also just want to Yeah, I'll reiterate that I do think we need to always make sure we have a continuum of services available to students. That I think, as IDEA says, we do want students to be included in the gen ed classroom to the maximum extent appropriate. But we also always need to be asking, are they learning something and are they meeting their goals? And I think for many of our kids, it does make sense to push inclusion very hard, but also have a period of time of the day that is very intensive pull out, where they are receiving hardcore instruction from a expert instructor who's using data to individualize. And I think those two things can happen at the same time. I think one of my biggest concerns, and I think this hits middle school a lot, is students who are just fully included in gen ed and no one is teaching reading instruction because the science teacher's not doing it, the social studies teacher's not doing it. So I think that's where you go back to the document of the top 10 tips. That guide that I showed you, that's a checklist, that is where it really forces the conversation in the IEP meeting of what do we want to do and how can we make these things happen? And sometimes sitting in gen ed all day is not the best thing we can be doing for a kid. And so I think that document can kind of help with that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I think we're going to wrap up with our last few slides here.
Okay. Do we just share the screen again?
Yeah, that would be great. If you could pull that up real quick. I just dropped a survey link in the chat for just you all to provide some feedback on today's webinar. And if you have any ideas on future events, that would be great. You can also scan the QR code here. And then on the next slide, you'll just see our contact information for the National Center on Intensive Intervention, and we will be posting this recording on the website. And then if you move on to the last slide, you'll see just the references from today's presentation. And, again, I just want to thank Dr. Lemons for this great presentation and everyone for joining us today. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And if I mentioned anything that's not in the Dropbox, feel free to shoot me an email. And yeah, I just think, have fun with this group of kids. I think they do amazing things, and it's super fun to try to figure out how to use DBI to improve their literacy skills. So yeah, thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.